Highness, we are very fortunate that we have you as our chairman of the organization Ayushman India. But we come to you with some specific problems. And the first one is on the personality development of a child.
Yes.
We are seeing a huge change there. How do we stem this ascending curve? What can be the interventions?
Well, first of all, let me say, though I'm chairman of the society, you're the one who runs it. You're the moving spirit behind the society. And you're doing it very well. Now, the question of how children are growing up now, the environment is totally different than it was when I was growing up. And that's a long time ago. The outer circumstances have changed. When I was growing up, the British were still ruling in India. Can you imagine? I remember the Union Jack flying over the Rashtrapati Bhavan. But so that was a different world. And I myself was born into a feudal family. And therefore, my experience would hardly be, common, hardly be replicable. But what I am aware of is that children nowadays, first of all, they start earlier. They start school at almost 2 years old, they're sent. And perhaps that's a good thing, perhaps. Because if the home environment is supportive, then to pack children off to school at such a tiny age doesn't seem to me to make any sense. But if the home situation is not supportive, as is often the case, then I think it's just as well that they go to their schools. Then they go on to primary. As they grow up, the usual problems of growing up, the stress of examinations, the growth of their sexuality, and that's tremendously important because on that depends how their personality develops. And so what I think we have today is a national education policy now, a new national education policy. I was involved in some way in that policy. And I think they have made some important changes in the methodology of education. But the children still suffer from a lot of stress. For one thing, the home atmosphere is now broken up because both parents are working. So it isn't as if they just go back to a comfortable mother and sit with her and she's in the household. That's not the case any longer. Young couples are having children and both of them are working. So there's one thing that has to be looked into in some ways. Ideally, of course, the school should provide the psychological inputs necessary for a good growth into adolescence.
Right.
Suppose you have childhood, then you have adolescence, then you have adulthood. So each one involves changes, physical changes, psychological changes, and each one has to be dealt with on its own because they don't necessarily meld into each other.
Right.
So that's what I think that, and coming back to your point about stress, we'll come to that later, but naturopathy is a very good way to prevent stress and to de-stress, which is what people need now more and more.
My next question to you is that we have moved from communicable disease to non-communicable disease in majority. How do we deal with it?
Well, communicable diseases have been controlled. 500,000 people used to die in India every year of malaria.
That's right.
500,000 people every year. Now, perhaps 2,000 or 3,000 people die, obviously. So we are able to control communicable diseases, although we're still far from succeeding, largely because of sanitation, because we don't have proper sanitation, proper water supply. But as far as communicable diseases are concerned, non-communicable diseases, the main, I suppose, are involved with the heart and with the mind. These are the two major organs of any human being. Now, young people are beginning to have heart attacks. I read almost every other day in the gym, the young man collapsed and died and so on. So, I think that the gyms and all are fine, but we mustn't overdo them. The problem is, you see the difference. I grew up in a beautiful atmosphere where in Kashmir the weather was lovely and the air was clear and all. That is not so now. Now we are in the grip of some of the worst pollution anywhere in the world. I mean, Delhi became, I think, perhaps the most polluted city in the world. So obviously the children, the people, what will they breathe? And if they breathe polluted air, it's going to affect their heart, their lungs, and above all, their minds. You see, the mind is really the key to human development. You asked me how I was able to keep my balance during all these years. Because I did a lot of things also. As I said, music is a very important part of my life. And therefore, I listen to a lot of music. I sing myself. And from childhood, I've been singing folk music, classical music, and rock music, all three.
Nice.
So it's a lucky combination. And then I think yoga, thanks to the Prime Minister, now yoga has become famous around the world because of the International Day of Yoga.
Yes.
And yoga, I think, is very important. But what I seem to see is most people look upon yoga simply as a series of physical exercises. The real thing about the yoga is the mind. Does it clarify your mind? Does it stabilize your mind? So it's not merely, as I always say, the capacity to stand on one's head is not a necessary requirement for spiritual liberation. You can do it without having to stand on your head. But the yoga, the deepest forms of yoga, I have a whole thesis on yoga. I don't want to speak on it now, but very briefly, there is the Jnana Yoga. It's the way of the mind, intellectual way, the way of Plato, reading texts, studying, thinking about the problems that face us, and trying to understand how the mind works. That's the Jnana Yoga. Then there's the Bhakti Yoga, which is yoga of the heart. That's where the heart has to open in love and devotion to your chosen form of devotion.
That's right.
And the glories of Hinduism is it gives you so many different combinations and so many different options. Male, female, zoomorphic, anthropomorphic, and there's a whole... So the heart is, I think, tremendously important for spiritual development. So the Jnana Yoga is the way of the mind, the Bhakti Yoga is the way of the heart, the Karma Yoga is the way of the arms. You must do something worthwhile. But every karma is not Karma Yoga. Unless you do it in a sense of dedication and devotion to the divine, it doesn't become Karma Yoga. I mean, what is happening in Gaza now is not Karma Yoga.
That's right.
It's very, very negative yoga. And so Karma Yoga has to be work that is consciously dedicated to the divine. And then the fourth is the Raj Yoga, which is the way of the breath.
Right.
How to breathe, how to sit, how to talk. So the Jnana Yoga, the Bhakti Yoga, the Karma Yoga, and the Raj Yoga. Between these four yogas, we have to develop ourselves. Not any one is not enough. I mean, you can be very active, but if your mind is not developed. So we've got to take an integrated view of yoga also. Yoga is just not one word.
Nice.
Yoga is a series of activities involving different organs of the human being. So yes, yoga, even the physical yoga is helpful. I'm not denigrating it in any way. But It's not enough. So to come back to your question, as humanity is progressing, I put that in inverted commas, we are moving away from communicable diseases, which we can control, to non-communicable diseases, which are more difficult to control because they are more abstract. They're more in the mind rather than in the body. But yoga can be very helpful in both, I think.
Right, you're correct. You're stressing on the fact about mind is extremely important observation, because we have seen the genesis starting from there itself.
Yes.
And so I would like to conclude by asking you the last question. So this one big so-called devil is called stress.
Yes.
And it's causing all kind of amplified problems in the society, including in relationships and so on and so forth. Just wanted to know your experience. Fine, you had a fortunate upbringing,
Yes,
but even till to date, I've been meeting you so often. How do you, what are the techniques and what are things that make you feel comfortable?
Well, I was 40 years in Parliament, and that's, if any place is stressful, is Parliament. And I think the reason I was able to in a way overcome this problem was going back to the divine, a spiritual. In fact, it came one stage, I used to have a mala with me in the Raj Sabha. When everybody was shouting and screaming and all, I was quietly doing my jap.
Wow.
So I kept myself detached. You see, detachment is a very important part of stress. If you're so much involved in something, it's not going well, then you're going to be stressed. But if you're involved in something and yet keep a certain modicum of detachment, that is the key. It's not easy. Because many people, once they are in a situation, they get carried away by the stress, which is inevitable now because there's so much competition. You talk of young people, there's so much trying to get into a university itself is an extremely stressful exercise. Some get in, some don't, you know. So it is a very difficult world to encounter and to overcome. But I think if you have an inner center, an inner spiritual center to which you can refer all these outer problems, I think that is what helps. Because if you don't have an inner center, then you get what? Then you become eccentric, you know. Anything can push you here and there. But if you have a center and you are centered in that, then whatever happens, you refer to that center and that helps you get over it.
Nice. Now, I'd like to thank you on behalf of every board member and our team from Ayushman India to have chaired us and brought us to the stage. And we do hope that we'll continue to make you feel proud in our endeavors that we're doing and continue to get your guidance, which you give every time when we have reached out to you. So we thank you.
Not at all, it's a pleasure.